Welcome to the budget special on Beyond the Headline. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. All through this month, we are going to be focusing on different aspects of why Union Budget 2023 is so crucial, why it matters for you, and why you should know what to expect. Very often, the whole coverage of Union Budget and the information you get about the budget seems to be a very dry and inaccessible kind of a description. An exercise of the government which doesn't really impact your lives. Well, that's actually not true. What is decided and announced in the Union Budget has a crucial impact on your finances, on your savings, and policy that the government unveils at the end of the day also influences the way the economy grows and hence your life progresses as well. It is schemes and announcements in the budget which have a far-reaching effect at the end of the day on our lives. Having said that, let's talk about why Budget 2023 is very, very interesting. For starters, you could say this is the first budget where the worst of the pandemic and most of the worries of the pandemic are behind us. So it's a full post-pandemic budget where how to save the economy during a pandemic might not be topmost on the finance minister's mind. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, this is the last full budget of the Modi government in its second term. The budget that they will present next year in Feb of 2024 will not be a full budget because they will soon go into elections and then a new government will present a full budget. This is their opportunity to make their policy ideals felt and known to the common people. Will this become a populist budget? Will there be a bonanza for agriculture, some relief for the middle income group of salary taxpayers who are often overlooked? These are some of the things we're going to be talking today on the show. But first, let me take you across to this special report.
February 1st, 2023. Our calendars are marked, expectations are riding high, challenges galore. Budget 2023 is undeniably poised to be presented at a very crucial time. With a pressing need to fuel India's growth momentum at a time when most of the developed world is staring at a recession. Well, Finance Minister Sitharaman has to deal with the jumbo pressures of managing expectations of a struggling middle class, of disappointed but wishful taxpayers, and the job-seeking youth of a post-pandemic India. Well, to top it all, the stage is set amidst a challenging political landscape. This is Modi government's last full-year budget ahead of 2024 Lok Sabha elections and is going to set the tone for his re-election campaign.
We do need targeted spending at the very poor, but we also need to understand even the layer above that, the lower middle class is suffering because of the lack of jobs. I know we are going into an election year, not this year, but the next one. So this budget is a preparation for an election year. But I think the best thing the government could do is focus on how it re-energizes growth.
Amid rising inflation, impending recession, peaking interest rates, and above all, India still giddy from a post-pandemic hangover, Budget 2023 expects fiscal prudence from the Finance Minister to redirect expenditure and re-energize growth. The biggest challenge for the Modi government right now is how to boost the country's economic growth rate while reining in inflation. India's retail inflation slowed down to an 11-month low of 5.88% in November, notably below the RBI's tolerance level of 6%. When Finance Minister appears with her Bahi Khata outside the North Block on Feb 1st, 2023, she is believed to be carrying answers to a billion Indians' hopes and expectations.
Well, on Mirror now, keeping you first, we discuss what does an average Indian want.
a country in which the highest population is in the age group of 15 to 64 and every third person is a youth. What reliefs and reforms do the salaried middle class, taxpayers and small business owners want? Well, revision of income tax slabs to ease personal income taxation, home loan interest rate cuts and hiking interest rebates on home loans, and even increasing standard deduction limits and incentivizing savings. All of these demands will help rev up our consumer-driven economy and add to common man's relief. But all of this while keeping the fiscal deficit in check and ensuring the government's coffers don't take a hit from losing tax revenue in the endeavor to give middle class some relief. Budget 2023 will face the litmus test of boosting growth, appeasing voters, and all of this while controlling inflation. Raksha Bihani for Mirror Now.
All right, to speak more on this, I'm joined now by Saugata Bhattacharya, Executive Vice President at Axis Bank, Madhavan Narayan, Senior Journalist, Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, Senior Economist, and Badri Narayan, Faculty Member, Oregon State University. He's also former Head, Trade and Commerce at the Niti Aayog. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us on our special budget coverage on Mirror Now. Just to set the tone, our idea is to speak directly to our viewers, the different stakeholders, and explain to them why exactly this budget is important and how it will impact them. Having said that, Madhavan, let me begin with your take on the crucial timing of this budget and the political undertones we're expecting to see.
Absolutely. I think this is the only thing we can say. In fact, the Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, actually said something to that effect. I cannot exactly recall the words, but this was about a month ago. Now, the important thing is that Amit Shah, the Home Minister, has announced something about the Ram Mandir being built by the 1st January, and next February will be too close to the elections for either electoral code of conduct to be followed or for the impact of any spending on this budget to be covered. And particularly in the northern Hindi belt states, my understanding is that apart from the Hindutva ideology, there will be a lot of emphasis on farmers. So I do not expect any kind of fiscal consolidation except in lip service, because the government can always take credit for higher GST collections or something. Nobody will be there to watch and count it, because by the time the deficit actually hits home, even if there is one, it could be a bit late for the government, for any critic to say anything. Except that inflation being at higher levels, it is a matter of concern for RBI and also global investors, and to that extent there might be some muted or staggered spending. But I do expect a hell of a lot of announcements in the budget, especially towards the farm sector and what I have been increasingly terming as micro-welfarism, in which although Prime Minister Modi is officially speaking against freebies, if you looked at what happened in the Gujarat elections or in Himachal Pradesh, the BJP has its own set of giveaways or participatory stakes of various kinds, in which there is an element of a freebie. You may not call it a freebie. In some cases it's a contributory thing, but there's always some kind of a subsidy or payout from the government. Apart from the fact that the Jan Dhan Yojana and the direct benefit transfer are a very essential part of the toolkit of the government. And therefore, in fact, I had heard this even about 8 years ago, that this was part of a long-term plan to unleash the DBT or Jan Dhan Yojana related benefits closer to the second general election after Mr. Modi comes to power. So this might be, of course, maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but there's a lot of things in the armory, if I may use the word, because we are talking about a pre-election period, that government is bound to unleash. Because I think although inflation is a matter of concern, because it's very important to understand the BJP's traditional constituency is more sensitive to inflation than unemployment, because unemployment is no longer an electoral issue in India. This is my slightly contentious take.
Right.
But inflation is, especially of food commodities or essential commodities.
Right.
So there will be there might be spending, let's say on the fertilizer or food side, to keep down that inflation while having a lot of announcements on the other side. Though I do expect it to be a, let's face it, it's going to be a populist budget.
So you know, a pre-election budget in a sense could be a populist budget, but the popular thing to do, the really popular thing to do, and let me come to you on this, Saugata Bhattacharya, would be a revision in the income tax slabs, which have not been touched since 2017-18. That would really give something to write home about. The inflation pinch that has felt, the lackluster consumption which needs to be boosted, and the fact that the new income tax scheme, so it has not really picked up, where you give up your exemptions and you have a lower tax slab. Do you expect some tinkering there, or does the fiscal space not exist?
So a couple of things. Thanks, Tamanna. A couple of things. One, I respectfully disagree that this is not going to be a populist budget, in the sense that, I mean, they're not going to preach the finance minister's earlier comment on reducing the fiscal deficit gradually, 0.5 percentage points. So this year they will probably be at 6.4% of the GDP. Then they will come down to about 5.8, 5.7%. Remember that next year the very high subsidies on fertilizer, food, etc., that the government has had to pay out this year, FY23, that will be much, much lower next year. And they've already, with the merging the PMGKY scheme with the Food Security Act scheme. So there will be those things. But overall, from a macro perspective, they will actually focus on the fiscal consolidation part, which is very important. Remember, this is the first time in decades that India is likely to take the pole position in the world in terms of contribution to global growth. They are not going to endanger anything in terms of what the foreign investors and domestic investors expect of the government. One. Second, in terms, you're absolutely right that consumption needs to be given a fillip, because, I mean, in a slowing global economy where exports are not going to be all that important a driver of growth, it's the domestic drivers which are likely to be important, both capex, capital expenditures, as well as consumption, private consumption. So yes, the finance minister is will try to put some additional incomes, disposable incomes, in the hands of households, people, etc. But it will be done in a very careful manner. I mean, so I do expect there will be a tweaking of the income tax slabs. They will try probably some more incentives to move consumers into the simpler tax regimes and away from the bunch of exemptions, etc. But yes, within the overall focus of consolidation, there will be some additional benefits given to taxpayers.
Okay, so additional benefits to taxpayers is good, but I want to come to a very important point Saugata has made about India's positioning and what message needs to go out from the budget in a year where everyone's talking about global recession constantly. Dr. Mehrotra, let me come to you on that. The narrative very clearly now is, and let's be honest, the data backs it as well, that India will be better off than the rest. We will still grow at maybe 6 to 7%. Which will be much better than a global growth of sub 2%, or perhaps between 2 and 2.5% as per all the estimates. How do we ensure that we consolidate that position and shield ourselves from the winter that's coming?
Well, I would generally go along with what Saugata has said rather than what Madhavan was saying, precisely because the government has to remain committed to a fiscal consolidation path. And growth, unlike what you said, Tamanna, is not going to be anywhere close to 7%. It's going to be close to 6%. Yes, that makes India look good, but India is also the country with the lowest per capita income in the G20. We have no choice but to grow fast, and anything below 7% growth for us is not growth which actually reduces poverty. How much fiscal space there is, I think there isn't. It's very clear. Yes, the GST takings have been good. Yes, corporate profits have been good, but only those of listed companies. But the fact of the matter is that if you look at the 4 engines of growth, well, private consumption that's private final consumption per capita in FY22 was still below 1920 level. So is there a possibility that private investment is going to rise? Well, it's a bit unlikely, because if consumption is low, private investment has remained low, it has not picked up. So the government will try perhaps to pump prime through capex, through public investment in capital expenditure. But it will probably not do it itself. In any case, it's not the biggest contributor. The states are much bigger contributors, and the government may actually repeat the kind of scheme it introduced last year, where 1 lakh crores was supposed to be transferred over the course of the year to enable state governments to increase their public investment, which could potentially crowd in some private investment. It's already been said, exports can't be expected to grow given the forthcoming recession. And government expenditure is going to remain constrained, regardless of the fact that GST revenues have been good, because there is a fiscal consolidation path. So yes, there might be some effort to pump prime, but not too much. And the pump priming is likely to be in the form of capex for states, is what I believe.
Okay, Badri Narayan, let me come to the basic premise and question of this show, which is our first show. Yes, Madhavan, I will come to you for responses, since two panelists have disagreed with your opening remarks. I'm keen to hear what you say, but give me a second. Let me go to Badri first. On the simple question of why this budget is important. I know we say it every year. Every budget is important. But the kind of positioning of this budget, post-pandemic, global recession, pre-election, there's a lot of factors to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And before getting to that, I would actually like to kind of reconcile the views by the different panelists very briefly. I think what Mr. Saugata and Mr. Mehrotra said is what we would like the budget to be. And I think what Mr. Madhavan has articulated is probably what it is likely to be. So,
what
and I
we
think,
want versus what is likely to happen. That's a good way of putting it.
That's my reading, but we'll probably come back to that again later. But in terms of cruciality, criticality, in terms of time, absolutely, it's essential that the budget is well thought and positioned properly. If you look at the history in the last few years, around 2016-17, the importance of budget as a kind of policy statement and announcement kind of diminished, because a lot of announcements like GST and others were made from time to time. But since the pandemic, the importance of budget has come back to its original levels, if not more. And right now it is very critical time, because one, the pandemic, we're all hoping that the pandemic is over, but we are staring at another potential wave, hopefully mild, but that is something to take into consideration. Then we have this global recession coming, and also there is a lot of talk about China plus one, supply chain resilience, and so on. So there we also have some opportunities to capture. So coming to the different drivers of growth and tying in with what the other panelists said, I personally think there is a lot of scope for boosting private investments if we come up with pointers for that in the budget. Because there are a lot of investments that are waiting to come to India if we have the investment climate that's improved. So that is one aspect, and definitely the tax regime change is something on the cards that a lot of people have been talking about. The alternative tax regime hasn't been picking up much. So and the G20 and also the longer term discussions that are happening now in terms of decarbonization, healthcare investments, and so on. There needs to be some seeds to be sown in the budget to come up with a detailed strategy on those things, and that a lot of it is going to be coming in terms of granular tax reductions on certain products and so on. And also another important thing is there is a lot of talk about making it easier, the whole tax payment and assessment system to be more user-friendly. and that is has been discussed.
That's going on. Let's be honest. That's going on from ages. That saral form keeps getting more and more saral, but that's not the concern, is it? That's not. I mean, remember, we're speaking to an audience who is right now living in the middle of prospects of high inflation, possibly losing their job or very poor increments, income suppressed, and they want to know what's in it for them. Madhavan, yes, you wanted to respond. At least Badri balanced it out. He says what you're saying is probably going to happen.
Badri, I'm thankful to Badri for coming to my rescue, as it were, but I think I want to make a nuanced point about any budget based on my ground level understanding of having covered at least a dozen budgets, if not more, which is that there are three elements to a budget. One is the announcements and the atmospherics. The other is the delivery of things on the ground based on government spending, especially for the poorer sections of the society. And third is the sequencing of the expenditure, which basically means front loading and back loading and the staggering of the expenditure. There's a lot of elbow room for the government to talk about fiscal consolidation, but at the same time focus more on the consumption side, because if food and basic items are kept cheaper, automatically disposable income increases. So it's actually, you can kill two birds with one stone if you do it carefully. The capex part is where I would expect some staggering, because although India will be a top growth economy, although there will be a need to have some counter-cyclical spending to affect for the anticipated global recession, you can actually backload that part of the expenditure. And last but not the least, I want to say, Tamanna, this is real politics at work. I have covered many budgets. By the time the revised estimates come in, even if the deficit is higher than what the announcement was, they would have been actually hitting the, coming back into a new government after elections. So that would be less of a political concern than anything. That's what I'm saying. Obviously, I'm not from the academia, Tamanna. I have to add some reality sauce to this.
Okay, so Madhavan saying he's adding the reality. Dr. Mehrotra, the fact that this is a pre-election budget, in a sense, would you expect more noise around agriculture and focus on agriculture?
Yes. Yes, one might expect that, for the simple reason that in the last budget, we didn't get that. In the last budget, I remember most of the agriculture spend was going to be on PM Kisan, the 6,000 rupees that's given to owner cultivators. So there may well be, but I actually go along with Madhavan when he says there might be backloading closer to the election of some spending. So the government may actually not front load expenditures, and it would backload closer to the elections, so that it gets the vote kickback that it would want to do. So in that sense, it might be able to kill both birds with one stone. That is, it continues on the path of fiscal consolidation, and at the same time capex is encouraged from early on through state governments, and a fair bit of the expenditure then of whatever kind, revenue or capital, could get backloaded closer to the votes. Don't forget that the government has recently, just weeks ago, announced free rations under the PDS, meaning for what ration card holders used to pay 2 rupees and 3 rupees a kilo, that's going to become free. So, you've already had some free.
But that's because they withdrew the PM Anna Yojana. It was a trade-off. It sounds better, but they spend less. They withdrew the PM Anna Yojana.
No, you are right. No, you are absolutely right. So this kind of pretense is likely to continue, because we may think, you see, where did I begin? Let's just remind ourselves that if this year we are getting a growth rate of about 6.8%, we're not going to get that next year in FY24. And since we are not going to do that, I mean, the expectation is that nominal growth will be about 11.5%, inflation will be somewhere between 5.5% to 6%, in which case you can see what the actual growth rate is likely to be. It could very well be sub 6%. In that case, where's going to be the fiscal space? I mean, that's really the point I'm making. I'm making a point about arithmetic, and I do want to clarify one thing, that no matter what the expectation might be, that private investment is not likely to pick up, for the simple reason that as the RBI keeps reminding us, capacity utilization is still running at about 74-75%. At that level, private investment doesn't rise. So, and in any case, it may well be that RBI may actually raise rates, the repo rate again, in response to the continuing threat of the US Fed raising rates. So, I mean, that's not an environment in which you're going to expect or get much private investment happening. So, I mean, all the big talk about, you know, yes, India the good spot or the driving growth, and all that's fine. But I mean, we are the 5th largest economy, and we have to grow fast because we are among the lowest per capita income.
You know, interestingly, the FY23 GDP estimate numbers that were out today, let's just take a second to look at it. The real GDP growth for FY23, as per the numbers that the government put out, is 7%. The nominal growth for FY23 is 15.4%. I mean, ending the year at 7%, the estimate, these are the advanced estimate numbers, seems not that bad. A good number going into the budget. Badri, your take on this?
Yeah, I think we have had.
Let me just add one sentence, Tamanna, before Badri comes in, with respect.
Sure, go ahead.
Just one sentence, if I might, Badri, forgive me. I just wanted to say that it's been 7% now. There are going to be 2 further revisions, point 1, about FY23.
Yes.
But more importantly, next year is not going to be anywhere close to 7, it's going to be close to 6, which gives you much less space. And all estimates in the budget for expenditure are based on you know, assumptions about what the growth rate might be in FY24.
Yeah.
Fair enough. My simple point being,
Sorry,
this is
Badri.
a nice number. It's a better than expected number to start with. Yes, Badri.
Yeah, no, I agree that it's definitely a good number because we have, you know, when we had such a dip during the pandemic year, the subsequent growth rates, you know, haven't been as much as we would have expected. So now it's time to look for such a high growth, and it's good that such a estimate has come through. And like Dr. Mehrotra said, it is going to be revised further. And also there is also a you know, thought process within the government, much like how we have in the academia and industry, that when you have high growth happening in a particular year, the subsequent years, the likelihood of sustaining that is going to be low. So we are staring at something close to you know, closer to 6%, like Dr. Mehrotra said, in the subsequent years. So it's a good news that, you know, we are expecting such a high growth now, but the question is, how are we going to sustain it going forward? And that is why, you know, coming back to the private investment point that Professor made, you know, the government has to take some efforts on that. Take some efforts on coming up with, you know, facilitating environment for investments, because I have seen a lot of interest from across the world to move investments into India, and now I feel not enough has been done in India to attract those investments. So that is one key aspect, because we don't have enough private investments domestically coming in. So why don't we be open to those foreign investments coming in?
So, you know, just to put the 7% in perspective, the RBI had reduced, I'm coming to you, Madhavan. I just want to put this into perspective because this bit is important. The RBI had reduced the estimate for India's FY23 growth to 6.8% downwards. The IMF had reduced the estimate for FY23 for India downwards to 6.8%. The World Bank had increased it to 6.9%. So in a way, the 7%, and I take that caveat that this is the first cut of the number because it's an advance estimate, has beaten all of this. So yes, Madhavan, back to the point. It's a good way for Nirmala Sitharaman to start when she presents her budget.
Absolutely. I think, Tamanna, you have a good point there, because I think it's important to know what is the context in which you're speaking in the backdrop rather than the upcoming, though I'm taking Dr. Mehrotra's point very well, that next year's the arithmetic is going to be a bit difficult if there's going to be a slump across the world, including India. But one small point I want to add to on capacity utilization is that in the sunrise sectors, such as green ESG kind of spending, it is not going to be a function of existing.